So unfortunately, this lecture today is going to be a little boring, but I promise that as we go through the rest of the semester, we're going to talk about more exciting topics. I thought it would be a good idea just to kind of give y'all a lay of the land when it comes to ethics and metaethics. So this class is Introduction to Ethics, and primarily what we're going to be doing in this class is investigating various ethical theories on what makes an action moral or immoral, and then applying those frameworks to various ethical issues. What is lurking behind the scenes, though, is this whole field of metaethics, which investigates some of the presuppositions that ethics, applied ethics, and what we might call normative ethics are based on. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that today, just to give you kind of a brief overview of what philosophers think is going on when we make ethical claims. And then later we'll talk about actual ethical dilemmas. So the first thing that y'all need to know is that there are three major fields within this giant field of ethics. There's metaethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. We are going to be dealing primarily with those latter two, but today we're going to be talking about the first field. Here's how they are distinguished from one another. Applied ethics discusses how ethical principles and theories bear on moral situations. So, for example, if you're trying to answer the question, is eating meat wrong? That would be a question in applied ethics. You'd be looking at this question, applying different moral theories to it, and then trying to come up with an answer. Or if you were trying to answer, is abortion always immoral? Or is incest immoral? Those would be questions that deal with applied ethics. Kind of underneath applied ethics is normative ethics. Normative ethics gives us the tools and the theories with which to do applied ethics. So we can classify normative ethics as the field that discusses what makes an action moral or immoral and why. Apart from the first lecture in this unit, pretty much the rest of the lectures that we're going to go through here in the next couple of weeks are normative ethics. We're going to be looking at various ethical theories on what makes an action moral or immoral and why. We're going to look at Kant's view. Basically, the person's intention is what determines whether what they did was good or bad. We're going to look at a consequentialist view known as utilitarianism, which argues that it has nothing to do with your intention, it has everything to do with the consequences of the action. Did your action produce net positive or net negative consequences? And we're going to look at other theories as well, like virtue theory, which focuses more on how to be a good person. We're also going to look at the feminist ethics of care, which argues what makes an action moral or immoral is whether or not you're appropriately caring for those that you are responsible for in your field, which includes you and others, your family members, so on and so forth. What underlies all of this stuff is metaethics, which is kind of confusing, and I'm going to throw a lot of terms at you today. Just do your best to write them down. If you want to, you can commit them to memory later. Yes?
Can you give an example of the normative ethics question, please?
Yeah. What makes an action moral or immoral? That would be a good one. And then applied ethics would be more specific, like, is this thing moral or immoral? Is that thing moral or immoral? Metaethics is going to ask, what do we mean when we say moral and immoral? What is good or bad ultimately? What are we doing when we make moral claims? What are moral claims about? It's meta. Whoa, right? Some deep thinking stuff.
You brought up one that was like, is it for the good of the people you're looking after? What was that called?
Ethics of care.
Ethics of care.
Yeah. That was a feminist ethical theory pioneered in the 20th century. So, what we're going to be talking about primarily today, and we're not really going to revisit this a ton, is metaethics. We can define metaethics as the field which discusses how, why, and how we should engage in normative and applied ethics, and what the fundamental presuppositions of normative and applied ethics are. So, for example, let's say we're engaged in a question in applied ethics: is eating meat immoral? Metaethics would ask, what do we mean when we say immoral? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for making an action moral or immoral? What is goodness? What are we doing when we're asking a question like that? What's going on in our minds? What do we mean? What are we talking about? So in some way, metaethics has a lot to do with the psychology of ethical statements and ethical judgments. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, what was the example you gave for the applied ethics?
Like a question in applied ethics? Is eating meat wrong?
Okay.
Is euthanasia wrong? Is lying ever moral? Okay, moving on. The first thing that we're going to look at today are some views on what we're doing when we're making moral statements. The first view we're going to look at is known as cognitivism. This is the view that moral sentences express propositions. Does anybody know what a proposition is? Or perhaps how a proposition differs from a sentence?
Does it come from propose?
Kinda, yeah. It has something to do with proposing something, yeah. Is this a sentence that you could read in a work of literature? Ah!
No. Yes.
It is a sentence, right? Or some other exclamation could be a sentence. Not all sentences are propositions. Propositions are making some sort of claim about something. Propositions can be true or false. Not all sentences are true or false. Ah is not true or false, right? But he died is either true or false, right? Or I'm sitting at a desk is either true or false, right? Those are propositions. Cognitivism is the view that moral sentences express propositions. So when I say something like murder is wrong, I'm making a claim that is true or false. It's either true that murder is wrong or it's false that murder is wrong. We can further differentiate cognitivism into two more views. Semantic cognitivism is the view that moral sentences are descriptive. That is, they are describing a feature of the world, of reality, and they are truth-apt. In other words, semantic cognitivism argues that moral sentences express something about the way the world is, and they can be true or false. We're not saying yet whether or not moral sentences are true or false. We're just saying they can be. This is the view known as semantic cognitivism. In a little bit, we're going to contrast this view with another view known as non-cognitivism. Just to give you a kind of preview, the cognitivists are going to say when we say things like incest is wrong or pedophilia is wrong, what we're doing is we're trying to express a statement that can be true or false. But the non-cognitivists are going to say that's not what we're doing. When we make a moral statement, what we're doing is just expressing an emotion or expressing our approval or disapproval. We're not actually stating something that can be true or false. So as we go through the lecture today, just kind of think about this stuff in the back of your mind and see which view you think you line up with. To round out our introduction to cognitivism, we can also talk about psychological cognitivism. This is the view that moral sentences are the expression of a belief that a person has. So, when somebody says something like murder is wrong, according to the psychological cognitivists, what they're doing is expressing a belief that they have that murder is wrong. They believe murder is wrong. Shelve cases of lying and deceit. Normally, when we make moral statements, the psychological cognitivist is going to say we're expressing a belief that we have of the world. Is anybody here in any mathematics courses? Are you familiar with bijection or correspondence between sets? How if you perform a function on a certain number or variable, you map that to another domain. If not, that's okay. I can explain it with this picture. Basically, what the psychological cognitivists are saying is that our moral statements are like reflections of the beliefs we have in our heads. That's what they're saying. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So, one question that metaethicists ask is, what do moral sentences express? And this is a key point of disagreement within the field. On the other side of the debate, we have the non-cognitivists. Non-cognitivism is the view that moral sentences are not propositions. That is, these people believe that no, when we're making a moral statement, when we're saying something like rape is wrong, we're not expressing something that's true or false. We're not making a claim about the world. What we're actually doing is just expressing our own preference, or expressing an emotion, or expressing our own desire, something like that. It's not a belief, but rather it is something that isn't true or false that we're expressing. It just kind of pours out of us. Just as we could do with cognitivism, we can split non-cognitivism into its semantic and psychological subtypes. Semantic non-cognitivism says that moral sentences are non-descriptive and non-truth apt. That is, they do not express something about the way the world is, and they cannot be true or false. Because they're not making a claim about the world, these people think. When we say things like murder is wrong, or incest is wrong, or war is bad, we're not actually making a claim about the world that's true or false. What we're doing is just basically saying, boo war. Boo murder. Okay? That's basically what these theorists think. This lines up with the view of psychological cognitivism. It's the view that moral sentences are the expression of an attitude, desire, preference, emotion, intention, etc., not a belief, and not a claim about the world, if you're a semantic non-cognitivist. So these different views are trying to get to the bottom of the question, what are we doing when we make a moral claim or utter a moral sentence? What are we fundamentally doing? Again, the cognitivists are going to say, when we utter a moral sentence, we're making a claim about the world, and we're making a claim based on some sort of belief that we have of whether the thing is right or wrong. We think that moral sentences are true or false. Whereas the non-cognitivists are going to say, no, that's not really what's going on when we say things like abortion is good. What we're really doing, the non-cognitivists are going to say, is just kind of expressing something that isn't necessarily true or false, is not really based on a belief. It's just kind of an expression of a desire or a preference we have, or our approval or disapproval of a situation. Are you all clear on the difference between these two major views, the cognitivists and the non-cognitivists? If not, that's okay. We're not really going to revisit this stuff so much moving forward, but I just kind of wanted to give you all the lay of the land of some of the fundamental questions that underlie the ethics that we're going to be engaging in the applied ethics.
We need to identify the difference between them, like be able to pick out what sentences, which one it is.
I'm not going to test you on it, so don't worry about it too much. But it would be good for you to know, you know.
Can a non-cognitivist person debate someone who believes cognitivism?
I guess it depends what they're debating about, right? I mean, if they just fundamentally disagree on what we're doing when we utter a moral sentence, then there's no real debate to be had, right? It'd be like, I don't know, me arguing that everything that's occurring right now is a collective hallucination, and you just fundamentally disagreeing with that. You know, it's like, what can we do? We're at an impasse, you know. Any other questions? Okay, there's one more fundamental difference that metaethicists debate. And that has to do with the question, do moral properties exist in the world? Or, to put it another way, are there facts of the matter about whether or not something is moral and immoral, or immoral? I think a lot of you in this room are probably moral realists. Moral realism is the view that moral properties exist independently of human beings in the world, and they can be located. Basically, what the moral realists believe is, yes, there is a fact of the matter about whether an action is moral or immoral. Coming up and murdering you right now, the moral realist would say, that is factually immoral. If somebody were to ask you, is murdering you right now moral or immoral? The moral realist would say, yes, there's a fact of the matter, and it's immoral to just murder you right now for no reason. These people believe, yes, there are moral actions you can do and immoral actions. There are facts of the matter about what you should do and what is right and wrong. And furthermore, they believe that whether or not human beings exist has no bearing on what's moral or immoral. If all human beings disappeared tonight, it would still be factually true that raping an infant would be wrong. Regardless of if there are any humans around to debate it or do it, they still think, yes, it's a fact of the matter that raping an infant is wrong. We can contrast this view with anti-realism. Moral anti-realism is the view that there are no moral properties that exist independently of human beings, which can be located in the world. In other words, they'll say things like, well, really, what's wrong and what's right is just kind of an invention of human beings, or it has something to do with how we've constructed society. If all the human beings were to disappear tonight, there would be no moral or immoral stuff, because there would be no human beings to think it or do it. In other words, the moral realists are going to say, there aren't objective facts of the matter about what's moral or immoral independent of human beings. It's not as if there are moral properties or laws baked into the universe. They're going to say, morality is kind of like a human construction. Does that make sense? So the moral realists are going to take kind of a hardline stance. Yes, there are facts of the matter about what's right and wrong, regardless of what you believe or what you think, or whether you're around. And the moral anti-realists are going to say, lighten up a little bit. This morality thing, if we all died tonight, there wouldn't be moral or immoral actions. It's like a human invention. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So, now I'd like to just offer you a few metaethical theories that take different positions on the cognitivism versus non-cognitivism debate and the realism versus anti-realism debate. First, we'll look at cognitive realist theories. So these are theories that are going to say when we utter a moral sentence, we're saying something that's true or false. And these theories are also going to presuppose that there is a fact of the matter about what's right and what's wrong, independent of human beings, independent of your preferences or your desires. We can talk first about naturalism. Naturalism is the view that there are natural moral properties in the universe that determine what's moral and immoral, and that these are discoverable through empirical means. In other words, naturalists believe that there are like moral facts or laws kind of baked into the structure of the universe. They're natural just like, a plant is natural. It's a product of nature. Or a star is natural. It's a product of the laws and processes of nature. Moral facts are the same kind of thing that a star's existence is, or skin's existence is. It's a product of natural processes. And so, they're going to say, yeah, there are facts in the matter about what's immoral and moral, and these facts are downstream of what nature has done in this iteration of our universe. Okay? And that we can discover what's moral and what's immoral through empirical observation. With our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, through study, through experiment, that kind of stuff. We can contrast this view with non-naturalism, which is kind of a big umbrella term, but we're going to focus on what we might call intuitionism. It's the view that there are non-natural moral properties in the universe that determine what's moral and immoral, discoverable through intuition. So somebody who believes, for example, that God determines what's right and what's wrong, that right and wrongness aren't baked into the fabric of reality like the laws of physics are, that's going to be a non-naturalist. Generally, non-naturalists, or at least intuitionists, believe, no, we don't discover what's moral or what's immoral through scientific study or observation or experimentation. We just kind of intuit it. Like, you know how when you have a dream sometimes and you just know something in the dream? You have no business knowing it, but you just know something, right, while you're in the dream. That's kind of like what the intuitionists are going to say. It's like, all you have to do is look at a moral situation, and it just, there you go, it comes to you. You can tell if it's right or wrong. You don't have to look at the situation under a microscope, objectively using science. You can just intuit whether something is right or wrong. Oftentimes, intuitionists are going to say that, like our five senses, our sense of smell, sight, taste, touch, and hearing, we have a moral sense, an extra sense to determine what's right or what's wrong. But not everybody believes this. So do you understand the differences between these views? This is kind of a more scientific view of morality. This is kind of a more, wooey, or mystical, or theological, or, a view kind of like that.
So do the non-naturalists, do they take into consideration conditioning or how society plays a role into it, or it's just purely intuition based?
I think a lot of them are going to say that our intuition can be messed with. Yeah, you can degrade your own conscience by doing a bad thing over and over and over again, such that you don't feel bad about it anymore, and such that you might lose the ability to see if something is moral or immoral. Yeah?
I have a question for the class. Does this whole background is not scientific? I don't think any of us would pretty much actually. Oh my God,
That's okay.
No, it's okay. I was just wondering.
So, both of these views, however, they agree that there are facts of the matter about what's right and what's wrong. They just kind of disagree about their origin, the origin of morality, and how we can know whether something is right or wrong. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's now look at cognitivist anti-realist one theory. The only one that I know of that is cognitivist anti-realist is J.L. Mackey's error theory. This is a picture of J.L. Mackey. He's a pretty influential philosopher in the 20th century. He put forth this view that argued that there are no human independent moral properties that exist in the universe, though moral sentences are expressions of what people believe. To encapsulate what he believed is this last sentence here. All moral sentences are false. Why? Because we have beliefs about what is right and what's wrong according to Mackey, but there actually aren't any facts of the matter about what's right and what's wrong out there in the world. So all moral sentences are false because although we have a belief about what's right and what's wrong, there is no real fact of the matter about what's right and what's wrong. So we're making a false statement because our beliefs don't correspond to anything in reality. Does that make sense? It would be like you saying, unicorns are green and red. And you really believe that, right? Well, if there are no unicorns that exist, what you said is false, right? Because there are no unicorns. So Mackey believed that the moral claims that we make, the moral sentences that we utter, they don't correspond to any facts out there in the world. So really, we're just walking around saying false things. It's kind of a weird view, right? But the fun doesn't stop there. There are other weird views that we can entertain. We can talk about some non-cognitivist, anti-realist theories. So these theories are going to be in agreement on moral sentences are not true or false. They don't express a belief. And they're going to agree on there isn't really a fact of the matter about what's moral and what's immoral. For example, we can bring up emotivism. Emotivism is the view that there are no human independent moral properties that exist in the universe. Moral sentences are just expressions of emotional approval or disapproval. So just like a facial expression is an expression of some emotion that you're having, they're going to say moral sentences are just expressions of emotions you're having. They're not true or false claims. They're not based on beliefs. You're just expressing how you feel when you make a moral statement. So they'll say something like, when you say pedophilia is immoral, what you're really doing is just saying, boo, pedophilia. I don't like pedophilia. I feel negatively towards pedophilia. You're not actually making a claim about there being a fact of the matter or anything like that. You're just expressing an emotion. Or when you're saying, diet and exercise is a good thing. What you're saying is, hurrah, diet and exercise, yeah. That's basically all they think is going on. Okay? We can contrast this view with prescriptivism. Prescriptivism is the view that, again, there are no human independent moral properties that exist in the universe. Moral sentences are subjective prescriptions for others to act in accordance with our own moral judgments. So, the prescriptivist is going to say, when your friend says to you, you shouldn't be smoking weed the night before a test, what they're really saying is, I'm telling you how you should live your life based on what I think is right and wrong. So they're not making a claim about what is objectively true. They're just telling you how you ought to live given what they personally think is right and wrong. They're making a subjective prescription, right? Like a doctor gives you a prescription. It's to take this drug, right? A prescription is basically a you should or should not do this thing. That's a prescription. So, these theorists, the prescriptivists, believe that when we say moral stuff, basically we're just telling other people how to live their lives based on what we personally think is right and wrong. That's all there is to it. Can you all see the kind of differences between these views here? I'm going to leave it up to you to kind of meditate on all this and figure out what you think you believe. Generally, the majority of people, I think, are cognitivists and realists. I think sometimes these non-cognitivist and anti-realist views come in and out of fashion in small circles. But generally, I think that the way that we engage in ethics, when we say things like abortion is immoral or incest is immoral, is that we tend to think that we're saying something true. Right? But you might not be a cognitivist or a realist, and that's fine. You have to figure that out for yourself. So here's a helpful little diagram to put all those views into perspective. And you can copy this down if you want. I'm going to upload the PowerPoint. It's kind of hard to see, but from left to right, we have moral realism, relativism, emotivism, expressivism, prescriptivism. In the rest of this class, we're going to tend to focus on ethical theories which kind of presume cognitivism, but more importantly, moral realism. So the moral theories that we're going to be looking at tend to presume that there is a fact of the matter about what's right or what's wrong. I think that's generally how people operate in life. At least that's how these theorists are going to cash out their moral theories. So, the two big umbrella terms are cognitivism and non-cognitivism. And then there are more specific views under that and more specific views under those. And you can do more research into these. We are going to talk about relativism later in this class. We're not really going to talk about quasi-realism. That's a weird view. In any case, this is how all of these views that we've been looking at today fit together. And I don't think I'm going to test you on these views when the final exam comes around. I think the majority of the questions are going to be application-based. But I think this is a good overview to give you a sense of what is going on in this field and how deep this field is. Okay? Because everybody thinks that they understand what's right and what's wrong, but very little do we often scrutinize the presuppositions that we're working with.
For the test and the final exam, how do you get a question wrong?
How do you get a question wrong? By choosing the wrong answer. What do you mean?
What kind of questions are we expecting to see if they're all moral and realistic?
For example, I'll ask you, according to this specific theory, which of the following actions would be moral? And then you'll just have to remember, oh yeah, okay. Mill said what makes an action moral or immoral is whether or not it produces net positive benefit or net negative. So which of these actions would produce net positive and net negative? And I'm not going to try to really trick you or anything like that. It should be pretty clear. But that's a good question, right? Because we are going to have debates about what is moral and what's immoral. It is not my job to tell you what is moral and what's immoral. What I'm going to be doing in this class is I'm going to be giving you a bunch of different frameworks with which to understand the morality of actions and ethical dilemmas. It's up to you to figure out what you believe, what view you're going to go with and imbibe, if anything. I just want to expand your horizons, expand your consciousness. I don't want to fill your heads with my picture of how I think reality works. Okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions about this stuff? Go over this again in your own time if you want. It's not incredibly important. What is going to be important is studying the ethical theories that we're going to look at in the rest of this unit. You're going to have to know those and their differences, and why the philosophers end up formulating those specific ones. Okay.